Welcome everyone to today's webinar, and welcome to all the participants in the Cleantech Open 2018's cohort. I thought I'd start out by sharing with you a little of my own background. I'm Terry Swack, the founder and CEO of Sustainable Minds. Sustainable Minds is actually my second Cleantech startup. And one of the questions I'm sure all of you are getting coached on when you develop your pitch is, what was your aha moment where you had the idea for your business? Well, I'll tell you about my aha moment for Sustainable Minds, but it requires a little bit of backstory, but I think you guys will appreciate it. So back in 2004, I decided that it was time to do something that mattered, and my career prior to that had been in building web-based products and services. So I tried to figure out, what could I do with my skills of designing and building web-based products and services? How could I bring that to the clean tech space? And so I joined the MIT Enterprise Forum. I'm based here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and started going to every lecture and presentation on anything related to clean energy, whether it was hydrogen fuel cells, PV, utility company executives, wind, everything I could get my hands on to learn about, to figure out where would I fit in. And pretty soon I started seeing some of the same people at these events. So we started to talk to each other, and it turned out they were like me, exiles from another industry, looking at the beginning of clean tech, saying, geez, we've got skills. We must be able to apply our skills to something that matters. And so we all decided to get together and do something that people at MIT love to do, which is we started a business plan competition. So in 2004, I was one of the founding members of the Ignite Clean Energy Business Plan Competition, which fast forward a few years later, ultimately became the Cleantech Open. So I'm thrilled to be participating a decade later, and to see the organization evolve to the degree that it has into such a formal and powerful program to launch. It's pretty exciting businesses, and been looking at some of the company names as you've been registering, and really excited to see those ideas that you're out there developing, and the world needs the work you're doing more than ever. Anyway, I promised you my aha moment. So in the midst of starting this business plan competition in 2004 and then 2005, there was lots of money being funneled into clean tech. It was just the beginning, and so there was a whole bright-eyed outlook, and tons of money going into funds, but yet government and industry were still dragging their feet, saying, nobody's asking for this. And that was my aha moment. I said, well, how would people know what to ask for? How would they know what would be different if certain kinds of energy technologies were developed? What impact would that have? And so that aha moment was for my first clean tech company called The Beam, BEAM, which was a content community and commerce destination. It was the intersection of Web 2.0 meets clean tech. So now this was 2005, 2006, when Web 2.0 was a thing. And I raised $500,000 here from various angel investors, but I couldn't get an institutional investor to fund what was essentially a consumer-facing clean tech play. So I had to go out to the Valley, and I got about $6 million in financing from one fund who will not be named, who believed in investing only in game-changing ideas. And so we'd already launched. We launched at Greenbuild in 2016. We were well on our way to being a successful business, and not as often as people imagine this happens. The investors got overly involved, tried to change the business. We didn't get along, and so they fired me after 2.5 years of killing myself to get this company off the ground. And you know, you can imagine I was pretty upset, to put it mildly. But I was working on one part of the problem. We were trying to build the shopping center for the Beam, and we were having trouble developing criteria for how would we select and include the products in the shopping center to tell a credible green, and I'm using air quotes around the word green, to tell a credible green story. And that was when I started learning about life cycle assessment. This is 2006, 2007. And I went and visited lots of manufacturers, from big ones like Toyota to smaller ones, guys making solar powered backpacks. And they fired me before we could get the shopping center off the ground. But what I realized was there weren't a lot of great green products in the marketplace in 2006, 2007. And the reason for that was that green doesn't mean anything. And even the manufacturers who would care about making greener products didn't know what to do or how to do it. So 3 months after I was fired from the Beam, I started Sustainable Minds. And take a note, I learned a lot of startups get started out of revenge. And so I said, I'm going to have a more impactful company. I'm going to build a company that delivers knowledge and tools to product manufacturers to help them understand what green, air quotes, means, and we're going to get into that, and how they can actually make higher performing, greener products and transform the world that we live in. So that was 10 years ago. And here I am. I'm going to tell you what we've done in 10 years, and I'll show you a slide about that. But I think the important thing, to take away from my story is that, this is your first company. I hope it's a success. If this one doesn't go the way it's planned, you'll do another one, and you'll do another one, and you'll get it right. You have to trust in yourselves and your ideas. And the last story or learning I'll share on this topic is that someone once told me that startups don't go out of business when they run out of money. Startups go out of business when the founders give up. So with that, believe in yourselves, pour all the passion you can into it, learn everything you can possibly learn along the way, because maybe you won't use it in this company, but I assure you, you'll use it later. So I'm just going to pretty much give you the presentation that we give in training to other manufacturers and industrial designers and business people and all the people who you have on your teams who need to get on the same page, thinking from a life cycle perspective and bringing that life cycle thinking into your product development. So anyway, today, Sustainable Minds is the only end-to-end product transparency solutions provider in the market. We started out with the software that we're going to talk about today. We actually were the very first to bring a cloud-based sustainability software solution to the market, and let alone cloud-based. We defined the category of sustainability software, and we were able to launch quite successfully as I went and raised angel financing again, and our lead investor was Autodesk, because after the bad VC experience I just shared with you, I thought there had to be a better way to raise money than VCs. And yes, getting money from strategics cuts both ways, but for me, it turned out to be a great thing to do, particularly given I knew nothing about engineering software. I'd never worked in the engineering software space, so having Autodesk as our lead investor, gave us a ton of credibility to be able to offer a brand new kind of software solution into a pretty traditional space. In 2013, we transitioned into a focus on the building products industry when the U.S. Green Building Council integrated life cycle assessment into into one of the new credits in LEED version 4 that rewards product manufacturers for doing life cycle assessments of their products and creating technical disclosures that report the results of those LCA results to the market. And so we began to tell a bigger story about how designing and marketing greener products is really a continuous improvement loop. And continuous improvement is what any organization strives for. And so we have this very unique makeup in the company. It's a deep technical expertise in life cycle assessment and material ingredients, my own expertise of customer experience design, information design, and cloud software. And we also became a standards developer, particularly for ISO 14025, to be able to innovate in this technical reporting space. And now we have this integrated story and platform. But this is the result of our eco-concept and LCA software over the 10 years since I started the company. We did market to manufacturers and industrial design firms. That's who the software is for. But like any other engineering software company, we took a page out of Apple's playbook and Autodesk's playbook, where if you get your software into education and get students using your software while they're in school, they'll take it out into industry for you and help you grow the market. Well, it turned out, you won't be surprised that we were pretty much too early bringing a sustainability software solution to product manufacturers. It's taken a while for the market to evolve, but I'll be happy to tell you we are now finally achieving product market fit with manufacturers for this first product. But where we got unexpected adoption and virally has been in higher education. And today, our software has been used in over 90 countries all around the world. We get excited when we see somebody sign up for a trial account when they're from a country we've not seen before. So we add a dot to the map. This one is our favorite. This one was an associate professor from the University of Mauritius. We were very surprised to see that one come in some years ago. But what we're really proud of is that our software is used in every discipline that you find in industry. It's used in business curriculum, so MBA programs, undergraduate business, executive MBA programs, every kind of engineering, chemical, environmental, civil, mechanical, as well as industrial design and now even architecture. And that was our intent. We like to tell people that in the 2 years that we developed the product before we really formally launched it, we went through many iterations, many prototypes, many alphas, lots and lots of testing with different kinds of users, because we wanted to make sure that we were making something that was credible from a technical perspective, but easy enough to use so that a business person or a designer would not have to sit with an engineer to be able to use the software to be able to make informed decisions. I think you saw our mission on one of the earlier slides. Our mission has never changed. And given now I told you our backstory, my backstory about starting the Beam and not having enough products to build a good shopping center, Our mission has always been to help manufacturers operationalize environmental performance into mainstream product development and manufacturing for the purpose of driving revenue and growth through greener product innovation. So it's not about doing the right thing, although at the end of the day, it is the right thing to do. This is the only path forward if we're going to continue to grow our economies. The economy has to grow in a way that that is sustainable. And the only way to continue to grow sustainably is to innovate. The only way to innovate is to use innovation strategies, because innovation is not about thinking up an idea and going and doing it. It's about learning a bunch of stuff. It's about applying frameworks and knowledge and failure and repeating things over and trying new combinations of things. Innovation is a journey. And so we realized we couldn't only build an easy to use technical tool. We had to build a tool that would allow product teams to innovate through using technical knowledge and combining it with strategies, a strategy framework, excuse me, that would let them learn and explore and measure along the way. So eco-design thinking is where the innovation happens, and life cycle assessment is the technical measurement. You want to keep in mind that only thinking differently without measuring the results could mean that you're creating unintended consequences in other impact categories. And if you only measure without thinking differently, you're likely to get some incremental improvements, but really not much beyond that, because you're only being informed by a technical measurement. So you have to do both. So we use the term green. It's actually code. Green is code for the term environmental performance. And environmental performance is just the latest criteria in product development. It has been for the last 10 years. This is the story that we told out of the gate. This slide is probably from our very first pitch deck with very few changes to it, because environmental performance is still a new criteria for some manufacturers, but it sits alongside functional performance, cost, aesthetics, safety, all of the traditional criteria that manufacturers have and use. They also have tools and metrics for measuring those criteria and being able to make trade-off decisions. But now that environmental performance is one of those criteria, they need tools and metrics to be able to make trade-offs based on that criteria as well. And the pictures on this slide were more required than maybe they are today, but there are real business drivers driving the demand for products with better environmental performance, ranging from the cost and competition for natural resources, regulation, in those days originally coming out of the EU, but all over, managing supply chain risk. That icon is the little microcosm of the story about Mattel buying Barbies from manufacturers in China who were using lead paint, and then having to recall a zillion Barbies. That was an enormous problem. Those are all external drivers, but then you've got manufacturers' own internal drivers, which is to build a brand that stands out in the marketplace, to innovate, bring new innovative products to market, and to acquire new customers and new revenues from those innovative products. And finally, what's really important to keep in mind is there's a meme that's been around for a long time where people assume, greener products cost more. That is patently untrue, because where there are impacts in a product system, there are costs. Environmental impacts equal costs. So when you reduce environmental impacts, you are ultimately going to reduce costs at different points in the life cycle. What the manufacturer decides to do around pricing their products is up to them. The actual cost, though, to you, those people making products, will be lower because you're making performance improvements. And so, this is why you're here, to learn a little bit about how to use this new knowledge and develop processes and use this tool. This is probably the most compelling financial comparison, if you will, of why it's really important to evaluate the life cycle impacts of products early in concept design rather than later in detailed design. For those of you who have been in product development organizations before, you know that once you're in detailed design, many decisions have already been made and lots of balls have been put in the air. Undoing any of those decisions once you're in detailed design are very expensive and can cause a lot of complication. And it turns out that the decisions that inform the environmental performance, like material selection, energy requirements, recyclability, product lifetime, those decisions all get made in concept development. So if you try to change any of those later, that's when you start getting into trouble. So you need to be considering those parameters early on when concepts are still, by definition, loosely defined and rapidly changing. You need to be able to make comparative trade-off decisions. So this is the first thing that you have to do, that any product organization has to do, which is to rethink, or for the first time, think about the entire life cycle of a product, from raw material acquisition through material manufacture to product manufacture. You've got transportation and distribution between every phase in the life cycle. You've got the use phase, and then you've got end of life, and sometimes it even goes back to material acquisition. When we started Sustainable Minds, there's a category of engineering software called PLM, Product Lifecycle Management, and those softwares only ever managed cradle to gate. So manufacturers only felt they were responsible for this part of the life cycle, and once, this part of the life cycle, once the product left their loading dock, no more responsibility. But ever since then, and in this day and age, we all know that's no longer the case, that producer responsibility is critical, and manufacturers understanding their responsibility and their opportunities through the entire life cycle is critical to be considered, again, early on. And it was this idea that informed the name of the company, Sustainable Minds, because you have to teach people to think the same way before you can get them to act the same way. So thinking the same way means thinking from a full life cycle perspective. So this eco-design strategy wheel has shown up over the last 10 or 15 years, some variation of it, largely originating in Europe, not surprisingly, taking those life cycle stages and sometimes making them more granular. This is what this wheel's representing. But eco-design, what it does is it looks at those product life cycle stages and then identifies strategies that can be applied at each stage in the product's life cycle to decrease the environmental impacts. We've actually switched that around. We talk about environmental performance, so we talk about increasing the environmental performance because people would rather do that than decrease impacts. So we turned it to a positive. How do you increase performance? So these are design categories of design strategies that map to a life cycle stage that you and product teams can begin to use to understand where, what can you be doing to improve the environmental performance of products based on where the potential greatest impacts are occurring. And this life cycle stage, or this eco-design strategy under the innovation category, actually happens before the raw material acquisition stage, because it's important to get people thinking about this number one point, rethink how to provide the benefit. You can take a simple example of an 8-ounce package to bottle a beverage, and that's a very common project in eco-design thinking workshops and courses. How many ways are there to deliver 8 ounces of beverage aside from a plastic bottle? So, if you can start thinking differently about how to provide the benefit, and by the way, almost by definition, renewable energy or clean tech, you are rethinking how to provide the benefit of energy. But having said that, thinking about each one of these strategies standing alone is a very powerful rubric to kind of think through. And any strategy framework is also really powerful as an analysis tool. So you can do little tests. You can pick out some products in the marketplace or businesses. In this case, this was a Caterpillar remanufacturing services. And just even by reading an ad or one page on a website where a manufacturer is talking about it's a more sustainable product, you can take that strategy framework and start to analyze what they likely did to improve the environmental performance. And what you're going to find is that the greatest innovation happens when you use multiple strategies in multiple life cycle stages. And when that happens, it's very likely you're thinking about something that's never been thought about before. And that's when innovation happens. So let's talk about life cycle assessment. That was the eco-design quick tutorial. Life cycle assessment. Sometimes it's called life cycle analysis. It's the same thing. Sometimes it's called life cycle. Here I have life cycle impact assessments, and so sometimes it's called LCIA. It's all the same thing. It's both objective and comprehensive. It's used to look at the entire life cycle of a system, of a product or a system. You can look at individual life cycle stages. And when it's used in the market for making comparative claims, there are ISO technical standards, the 14040 and 45 series, that govern the way life cycle assessment is done and used to report into the market. But I show you this diagram. This is actually from the ISO standard. It's a very fluid process, like any other research activity. And this is going to be important because you're going to spend a lot of your time up front setting the goals for what you want to learn about your product system that you're building, and how are you going to define the scope and the definition of how do you know when you're done, which is how you do any research project, right? You have to set a goal. Here's what I'm setting out to learn. And when I've figured out X, Y, Z, where I've answered X, Y, Z questions, then I'll know I'm done. So the steps in LCA are you set the goal and scope, what you're going to include in the assessment, meaning which life cycle stages are you going to include, how much data about what goes into the system are you going to include. I'll show you more about that in a minute. Then you're going to go collect the data, or the actual product information if you're going to be benchmarking an existing product, or you're going to go out and gather data about the materials or inputs, so you have some idea about how you're going to make this, or what something today is already being made from. And then you're going to run that inventory, that list of inputs, through an impact assessment methodology and get some results. And so it's an iterative process. You're always kind of iterating through and trying different things. And ultimately, at the end, it's going to be incumbent upon you to interpret the results and decide, what you're going to do about it. So this is literally how life cycle assessment takes inputs like materials and energy and transportation and turns it into knowledge about life cycle impacts. And it also, we use this slide to explain how we have created a simplified life cycle assessment methodology that we've used in the software to make LCA simple and understandable for non-technical users. So we actually brought together life cycle assessment language with product development and engineering language, and thus the term system bill of materials. So we merged product system with bill of materials. So so if you take every single input that you're going to put into the model from all the life cycle stages, every input can be expressed through its chemical composition. It's called process inventory data or life cycle inventory data. So everything is made up of chemicals. And when these chemicals are put through the lens of an assessment methodology, all of these chemicals can be attributed to one or more types of impact categories, which can then be attributed to one or more types of damage, either to human health or to the built or natural environment. These are called midpoint impacts. These are endpoint impacts. Our software uses midpoint impacts, so you can see more granularly the types of environmental impacts your products are contributing to across the system. So this is a really important point. This is probably the most quotable quote over the 10 years I've had the company. People have quoted me saying this many times, and that is, there is no such thing as a green product. All products use energy, they all create waste, they're all made of materials. Green is a relative value. Environmental performance is a relative value. Something can only be greener than something else. Something can only perform better or worse than something else. There is no absolute. So it's only about comparisons. So now, anytime you hear somebody saying, oh, this is a green product, you can be one of those annoying people who say, no, there's no such thing as a green product. You have to back up your claim. How, is it greener than something else? And, explain that. So at the core of our software is this concepts tab where you're going to be able to see all of the concepts that you're generating. And you start by establishing a reference or a baseline. The first concept that you build is by default becomes the reference. And you can always copy that or build a new concept. And in this tab, you're always going to see all of the competing concepts compared to the reference. And you'll be able to see how much better or worse this concept is, each concept is compared to the reference. Now, also take a quick look. This shows you how it's very handy to use the eco-design strategy names, the names of each of those strategies when you're investigating a new concept. And while I said it's great to combine strategies, sometimes you're kind of leading with a strategy and investigating that. So it's helpful to use one of those strategies in the name of the concept so you can understand how these competing concepts, which ones are likely to deliver better environmental performance. And at any time in the process, you can always change the reference. So this might be your starter reference, but later maybe you've gotten to a point where you think it's great. And so you want to make the great one the reference and see if you can do better. And what I also would encourage you, particularly when you're in concept design and innovation mode, you always want to be going for the stretch goal. And you may not ever be able to get there today with today's technologies or the money that you have today or the resources or the supply chain. But knowing that there's an endpoint, there's a goal, there's a way you could get there down the road that really gets you the kind of environmental performance goals that are meaningful, it's important to know how to get there. And then you may have to back off because today you can't get there. Now, we've actually been discussing at the end of the session awarding some annual subscriptions and a few other things to some of the winning teams. We're working on the criteria. What's that going to mean? And one of the things that I always look for is exactly what I just explained, is good examples of how people have really explored the potential environmental performance of their products and really understand where the product system or the entire solution could go when it's mature or when the world has changed or when things are available, and what decisions they've made today out of the gate to get the best MVP to the market with the best environmental performance that they're able to achieve today. So what we have here is eco-concept modeling with real-time LCA-based results. So you can explore and in real time understand the impacts. So the software is really based on two big ideas: software, data, and collaboration, and then learning and knowledge sharing. So when I show you, we'll do a quick demo at the end. There's a learning center built into the software. It's the equivalent of about a 150-page textbook on eco-design and LCA with lots of images and tables and data and case studies and examples. A lot of content, even if you don't end up using the software to learn anything about your business. There's a lot of information that's easy to consume that can get you some knowledge that it's going to be handy in the future. I promise you. Our secret sauce, which isn't secret because it needs to be public, so we have a published methodology paper according to the ISO guidelines of our methodology, which is a blend of data from trusted sources, like life cycle inventory data. And we use TRACI, which was developed by the EPA some years ago, which is the impact assessment methodology for North America. These are the 10 impact categories organized by ecological damage, human health, and resource depletion. And we use a normalization and weighting schema developed by folks at NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology from the US government. And one note about weighting, weighting is a social activity. While each of these are very technical and based in science, weighting is a social activity, and the weighting process is really a debate where a group of people decide something is more important than something else, and they weight it that way. So what makes our life cycle assessment methodology understandable is that we've boiled these results from 10 impact categories down into a single figure score. And to do that, the people who developed this weighting schema had to decide that each of these impact categories was ultimately more important than the others, from 1 to 10, and assign a value, which is the same as saying they're all equal and attributing, 1/10 of each one to the score. That's also a weighting decision. You can read all about our methodology in a couple of places. We've presented it in a simplified way. There's also an entire ISO paper you can read in the Learning Center. And it's, of course, ISO 14040 compliant, because as we were bringing a new way to do LCA to the market, we knew we would never make it if there was any way that any expert in the field could poke a technical hole in our credibility. So we obviously spent a lot of time on that. So again, just to kind of wrap up the use case, the software is designed to allow you to benchmark and compare competing concepts. Again, it can be a product that exists, that you do a teardown or you do an estimate and you start looking at alternatives or ways to innovate on that. Or you can completely start with concepts without something existing and start making stuff up, putting in as much data as you actually know, to get quantified estimates of environmental performance. Again, it's for non-experts. It's a standardized way to get credible results for comparison, and then you get easy to interpret and share graphical results. As I mentioned, this is part of the Learning Center. The biggest section of the Learning Center is the user guide, and the user guide walks you through the entire process of setting up a project all the way through interpreting results. Here's an example of one of the pages about understanding the functional unit. I'll take a moment to talk about that because the functional unit is probably the most creative, but also the most technical part of setting up your research goals. You're setting up your goals. The functional unit is the unit that you decide to measure the impacts, the environmental impacts, to the amount of performance that the product is delivering. So let me unbundle that. A real simple functional unit might be the total amount of impacts per single product made. But let's say it's a product that uses energy. It's an energy-using product. Then the functional unit may want to be based on time. So the impacts of that product being used over time. And then that time will correlate to the lifetime of the product. So if you have a product that is being designed to be somewhat disposable, then you might want to set the functional unit as impacts per product for 2 years, because that's the expected lifetime of the product. Or if you're making something that's going to, or is intended to last a long time, then you would set the functional unit to be much longer, because that's now the unit of measure, the amount of environmental impact or environmental performance per service delivered. That's what a product does. It delivers service, right? So a lot of content about that. And when you start getting into understanding that a product delivers service and the units of service that product is delivering, oftentimes that will open up an avenue of innovation, because now you're thinking differently about the artifact or the end result. You're thinking about the service it delivers, and you can kind of free yourself from the form that you're familiar with today, or a formal approach to it, and to think much more conceptually about how do we deliver this service in a different way. And then when you compare the environmental performance of traditional methods of delivery versus new innovative methods of delivery, this is where you really can get, orders of magnitude better environmental performance. And it's often when new business models get conceived, that you don't always have to make everything yourself. There's other ways to compile components and ultimately deliver a service into the marketplace. This is a slide we use with business people to get them to buy in to innovation as to environmental performance as an innovation driver, that there has to be a way to measure ROI. Innovation isn't safe, it's risky. And that's why you want to have upfront metrics to be able to make informed decisions. So there's two ways to measure ROI. You've got cost savings and you've got value creation. So what we do is we give them these examples of how they might calculate cost savings, how they might calculate value creation, and then have them do their own version of how they'd measure ROI, what's relevant to their business, and ultimately plug in their own numbers. So I'm going to show you a couple use cases of how the software can be used. So here's the most frequent one. I've been talking about up until now, that the primary use case really is to benchmark an existing product, packaging, sub-assemblies, and parts, or any part of the product's life cycle, energy consumption, transportation, end of life. Understand where the greatest impacts are occurring, what's causing those impacts, and where real improvements can be made. With the results of that study, manufacturers can then drive innovation in R&D and concept design, set environmental performance targets for products and product categories, respond to customer reporting requirements. That's a really big deal these days if you're a manufacturer of materials or component parts, where the finished product manufacturer has an obligation to the marketplace to be transparent about what's in its products. It can also be used to analyze the feasibility of logistics and packaging reuse. So that's a products and systems and transportation modeling process. We've actually used Sustainable Minds to help manufacturers win new business. So manufacturers who private label or custom manufacture for other manufacturers can use, who want to be making higher performing products, can use Sustainable Minds in their sales process. I'll show you an example of that, as well as their design process, to demonstrate to their customers the environmental performance of their products. And I'm just going to jump to this last one. This is really, the important business school and business training use case, which is to get everybody in the organization to think from a life cycle perspective. Because now there's lots of people who make decisions, right? There's product managers and engineering people and designers and supply chain people and procurement people. Not like the old days when there was, maybe a product manager and an engineer who made all the decisions about what to make. It's a different world, and everybody has to be able to talk the same language and think the same way about where the opportunities are. So I'll show you a couple stories from customers. This was a very rapid process done a global flooring manufacturer who was looking to make a higher performing product that they could market as greener, and wanted to see which of the products from their current portfolio could they move into that space by changing what. And so Sustainable Minds was really a very useful tool for them to be able to rapidly model. And you can see they're actually comparing hardwood with carpeting, in the same project. And this is how we tell the story. Who were the users? What problem were they solving? What did they want to learn? This is what they wanted to learn. Here's who was doing the project. In what stage of the design process did they do it? What were the results? Yep, they confirmed they had a good potential for a greener product innovation direction. They were able to perform a feasibility study in 1/2 day that normally might have taken them 2 to 3 months if they were really going to do the full feasibility study. And what this did was get them pretty far down the path of knowing where to continue to investigate on a more explicit level. And the eco-design strategies that they looked at were lower impact materials, implementing a take-back system, and carpet delivery as a service. These two were real innovations. Lower impact materials, that's not so hard. These are much harder, and this is really where business models and innovation happens. Although their key learning was recycled carpet, using recycled carpet got them the most direct performance gain, and it was something that they could do quickly. So again, they could have a roadmap. They knew where they could get those gains quickly, and what their long-term roadmap could be. Here was this logistics and packaging reuse. It was looking at an IT hardware manufacturer trying to look at disposable packaging versus reusing packaging, and they were looking at primary, secondary packaging, as well as shipping pallets, which is actually a whole big study. And they were able to determine the optimal number of reuses of their packaging compared to disposable. It took them a day to do this study, and they looked at different materials. They compared disposable versus reusable. They looked at the reuse rate and logistics, and their key learnings. And this is, they fill this out. These aren't our words. That their key learning was they could use Sustainable Minds to model packaging delivering. I'll show you one more because we're coming up against our end time. Spartech is a manufacturer of plastic, all types of plastic products. And so they just built a new technology and innovation center, and would bring their customers into that center to sit down with their designers to design the different kinds of products that they were making for them. And they wanted to use Sustainable Minds as part of their design process to demonstrate the sustainability attributes. And so to do that, we added 75 new thermoplastics and additives to the data set so that they could be modeling with all the materials that they had. And this is an example of, we didn't have data for a particular type of plastic. The generic is called EVO, ethylene vinyl alcohol. And they were buying their EVO from a particular manufacturer, so they wanted to get the manufacturer's data. So they reached out to the manufacturer. The manufacturer had participated in an industry-wide study, did their own LCA of EVO manufacturing across Asia, created a industry-wide report, And that's what the Carrare folks sent back to us so that we could add this industry-created data set to our selector. And now everybody, not just the manufacturer who requested it, but now everybody who uses the software now has access to that particular material. One quick thing I'll show you when you start getting into using the software, there's all kinds of opportunities to annotate your decisions and take notes. Leave questions because you're going to be working collaboratively. You're not going to know the answers. You're going to be making assumptions. That's the beauty of being able to model concepts. You're not always going to have real measurements. You're going to be making guesses. We allow you to tag inputs as estimates or, essentially guesses, leave notes. It is expressly designed, again, to model concepts and learn simple things like, is one material better than another? That takes 30 seconds. Or to do something more complex and try to look at modeling the entire life cycle. After this webinar, the CTO folks will send you an email of how to get to the software and actually set up your accounts. I'll show you how to do that. You're going to come to the Sustainable Minds website, or actually I think I provided a link directly to the Buy Now. You're going to scroll down here and click Purchase Now. Disregard that it's the educator subscription. It's all the same. It's all the same software. But I think you're going to get a link directly to the Purchase Now page. You're going to put in your information, and you're going to get a referral code. And you're going to put in this referral code, and it will take you directly to the home page of your software. You'll have the subscription for 6 months. The annual subscription for manufacturers or professional companies is $1,400 a year. If you want to renew after 6 months, we're offering you the $49 student subscription. Should you want to continue to use Sustainable Minds, I'm going to really encourage you to watch the demos. We've got good instructional demos. Here's an overview about designing greener products. Here's a tour of the software and more detailed videos of setting up projects, interpreting results, kind of step by step. There's also, when you get into setting up a project, there's just-in-time content on each of the tabs. It'll look like this. So when there's terminology on one of the tabs that you're working on that you don't recognize, you can look over here, and it'll take you to some just-in-time information that will help you out. This is persistent. There's a quick start guide that'll help you set up a project. And of course, here's the Learning Center. So sections about each of these topics, and if you really want to learn about methodology and what each of these impact categories are, you can go down here to the methodology section, and each of those things get explained. If you need technical support, i.e., if you're looking for data that isn't in the data set, and I wouldn't be surprised because the data set has not been created explicitly for clean tech startups. What you're going to do is email support and ask us about, will we be able to add that data? If that data is available in other public data sources, we will add it for you. If it's not available, we'll get in touch with you about how important is it to get actual data. We can run through some scenarios. We might be able to direct you to an alternative material to use as a proxy, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. In every single one of the webinars we've ever done with any of the educators, and you can peruse those if you like. Been doing them for 4 years. Here's all these webinars from educators from different colleges and universities around the world, teaching different courses. Whenever anybody asks, how long did the students have to spend to learn how to use the software? The answer is, in every single case, the answer is, oh, they picked it up on their own. We've never even spent any time in the class teaching it. You're going to find it is really easy to use. We've really built in a lot of supporting content. And I wish you all the best. Now, let me see if there's any questions. And I'm going to say that you guys are not a particularly curious crowd because there is only one question. And that question, oh, here they come. Is Sustainable Minds geared to software companies? What I'm going to tell you is that I think the thing to do is look at what problem are you solving with your software solution? Are you replacing something that people are doing physically today? Are you enabling something that didn't exist before? Remember, it's all about comparisons, being able to tell a comparative story. So, if you really want to evaluate your own product, I'm not sure how compelling it is to tell a comparative story about the amount of energy used to run the servers that the application is sitting on, unless it's a story like VMware, where you have virtual machines that are saving hardware, but then it becomes a hardware story. So I would ask you to look at what innovation is your software providing relative to what is being done today in the real or physical world. Yeah, so does your database include materials used in building structures? Absolutely. The database was created for manufacturers of any kind of mechanical or physical products. What it doesn't include is food data. So you cannot use Sustainable Minds to model food products or comestibles. But yes, it has all kinds of materials for building structures. And let's see. I'm getting a thanks, and I think that's pretty much all the questions. So I'm going to wrap. Watch for the instructions to get sent to you. What I'd encourage you to do is sit with your team members and work together. One person can drive, other people can discuss and collaborate, and you can, again, work very explicitly, go through the whole setup, answer all the questions, what do you want to learn? Or you can work very rapidly. You can just quickly do some comparisons. Is this better than that? So just play around with it, and you'll understand what you'll be able to model and learn. So with that, I'm going to wish you a great day and the best of luck, and we will be in touch over the rest of the Cleantech Open 2018. Have a great day.